Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series, where I sit down with folks from different backgrounds and experiences to chat all about things pertaining to nature. My name is Ross, and this podcast is an extension of a passion project I started called Nerdy About Nature, which also includes tons of fun educational videos all over Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and basically everywhere else on the internet. Now, all that I create here serves as a means to inspire, educate, and engage folks with the outdoor world so that we can all become better stewards of it, have a little bit more fun when we're out enjoying it, and work to create a more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and just future for each and every one of us in this world that we all share. Because nature, it sure is pretty neat, and I think we should keep it that way. So come on, let's go get nerdy.
Come and take a nature walk with me. We're gonna check out some really cool trees. We're gonna hang around and talk about all those things in nature that we can't live without. Let's go get nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature, baby. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Come on, let's get nerdy about nature.
What is up, my fellow nerds? Welcome back to another episode of the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series. My name is Ross. I'm your host, and today's guest is a truly incredible human who has a very long and very colorful history of working to protect forests here in British Columbia, as well as around the world. And I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to sit down and chat with her about her experiences. I'm, of course, talking about Valerie Langer, who is an absolute legend. And Val currently works for Canopy who is today's primary sponsor of this podcast episode. And Canopy Planet, they do a lot of really amazing work all around the world, working to protect forests and biodiversity and ecological health to create healthy, resilient ecosystems within a changing climate. And they do this in various different avenues, which we'll, of course, discuss with Val and her kind of role today. So super inspiring, super amazing work. I started recording this episode today, like right in the middle of Val telling a story. And so it's a little bit jarring jumping into it, but it's her talking about her previous experiences and the work she did taking decision makers and politicians up in airplanes to take a look at BC and see the scale of clear cutting and kind of get, a better understanding of these issues at hand. So I thought it was a really good place to begin today's episode, just because, especially at the end of her story, I kind of make a quip about politics and politicians, but this is actually the last podcast episode I recorded before running for politics myself, and everything that Valerie said here in this conversation really stuck with me and influenced me in a really positive way. So I wanted to begin with that story. And then if you want to hang around at the end of the episode, I am going to kind of give some additional thoughts and context onto that and the weight and merit and everything that she had to say, because it was truly inspiring. And I don't know if I would have honestly ran for politics had I not had this influence from Val. So yeah, really cool, really amazing, inspiring conversation here. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with you all. So without any further ado, let's get into it with Valerie Langer.
And they used to own a couple of, small planes where you could sit.
Yeah.
Pilot.
Just like a little Cessna
like
thing?
8-9 people.
Okay.
A little bit bigger. Yeah.
Like the Beavers?
Like an Islander.
Okay.
Yeah. So they weren't water planes. They were. And then we would organize to take, in my case, because we were working on Vancouver Island and a couple times into the Great Bear, it was like people who are decision makers over land use or influencers over, decision makers. So we might have done something like take the economic development heads of Courtenay, Campbell River, and some of the council and mayor of some of the towns and villages around there, and take them up and fly them over Vancouver Island so they get a bird's eye view of what's happening to watersheds. Yeah. Where's your water originate? Where, take a look at this map. Like before we would do it, like where are the salmon rivers and salmon streams? What's happened here? And how does second growth look compared to old growth when you actually
let them make the distinctions and see it for themselves.
Like how different it is, and then we would get back, and usually we'd book a little room in an airport close by and have a conversation about what was that.
It's so funny to me how effective those methods of teaching are. It's like we do the same thing with kindergartners, but you do with politicians, and you get them out looking at the land.
Well, very often people are making decisions over things that they have never seen. Right?
Have no relationship to.
No, and they don't have any context. Like you might see on a map, oh, this is just a cut block, or it's one cut block in the watershed, and then you go up in the watershed and you see that the watershed's been 80% impacted already, and one more cut is just like 81%. And
it just keeps on going.
Where's the vulnerability? Yeah. Like that's China Creek for Port Alberni, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that.
Well, that's a great transition into the intro of this podcast. I'm sitting here in a lovely old growth Douglas fir forest here with Valerie Langer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Would you like to start off by just introducing yourself and what it is you do?
Well,
you've got quite a background. This might be a long introduction.
Let's try and shorten this up a little bit so I don't bore anybody just about, this is about me. So I moved out to BC, and when I was in my late 20s, immediately got off the bus in Tofino, looked out and said, I'm never leaving, and had my friends ship out all my, small amount of goods from my room in a rented house with a bunch of friends from university, and the rest is kind of history. I got involved with the Friends of Clayoquot Sound. The strategy of blockades was kind of like one of those really connective tissue of a group of kind of radical community members, and a bunch of people who were engaged with the First Nations in the area. And it was just a big eye opener for me that one, we had rainforests in Canada. Two, I had grown up very close to First Nations Reserve in Ontario, and then in school to learn about Indigenous history, we were taken 400 miles away from our town to a village that was reconstructed with like a fort and teepees outside, and so never really knew anything about First Nations, and I got thrown into this space, which was like the Radical University of Tofino at the time in the late 80s and then into the 90s, where we did everything like letter writing and community organizing and blockades, and none of it worked. And so my trajectory was more, and learning was more about strategy, like how do you develop leverage and power in order to have influence. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my history.
Yeah. So a really unique twist on the classic case of the Ontarian girl moves west and never leaves. So you went to Tofino, and like it always blows my mind hearing stories about those early protests in Clayoquot, because especially growing up, like I was born in the late 80s, so like hearing stories about like oh, you sent letters out and you got how many people to come, like that is just so foreign to me. Like even the idea of like phone call, like calling people, is so foreign. So when I see things like the Fairy Creek blockades, which is like primarily organized through social media and the ability to text through like secure apps, and like it's just like a whole different way of doing it. So that must have been like a really interesting and creative time to be involved in advocacy.
Like, and I work with a lot of people who are a lot younger than me, and wrap your mind around this. We would type. It was like
on a typewriter.
On a typewriter. We didn't have a computer, and we would type, first write them by hand, and then type out these letters, fold them up nicely, send them off with a stamp to government, and then wait 6 weeks to get a response. And nobody was like, how come they haven't responded to us like in 2 minutes? It was like there was no expectation that you would get a response really fast, and if you called and you made an appointment, etc. So everything was still like we were doing things every day, but the expectations of speed were just so different. And the way in which we organized was like we'd put posters up. We'd have people who were friends in in Victoria and Vancouver, and they would literally go out with like printed out posters and tape and that kind of thing. There was no texting there. That was even pre-faxes.
So you couldn't even fax things. Could you
not until the 90s.
Copy? I guess you could copy stuff.
We had a photocopier.
Yeah. I mean, and this is me totally projecting on what I think life would have been like at that time. But it feels like there would have been a sense of like a quality over quantity type thing. Like nowadays, like there's so many distractions, so many things happening that like when you get that automated response back from the government after submitting an email, you get this feeling like nobody actually read my email. But like if you send a handwritten or typed out letter, and if you get a response 6 weeks back, there's some sort of like confidence where at least somebody probably read the thing I wrote. Whereas nowadays it all just feels like they could just like, throw it into that junk mail folder and we'll just like, okay, right, so we got this many responses.
It's a lot easier now to do like where it's like click this button and then it writes a thing for you and you send it on, and that might be landing differently, but I think that everything changes and sort of shifts with the technology. Humans and technology, we've kind of, our brains and our bodies have even developed. Our evolution is interactive with technology. So because our technology was different in the late 80s and then the 90s, when digital, when we shifted from analog, it sounds like a dinosaur speaking, but when we shifted from analog to digital, it was not actually, I don't think it was a quality difference or quantity versus quality. I think it's just we engage with the way that our technology evolves, and the people on the receiving end are also evolving with that. So their metrics for how they gauge, this is really getting to be something. If you got 100 letters handwritten or typed and signed and in the mail, then that stands for 1,000 people who feel the same way but didn't bother to do it. But now when it's easy to click, you get 1,000 emails, and that's 100 times more.
Right, people who didn't.
Write the email. So the way that it registers and whoever's receiving it is just a different metric.
Yeah. So the advance of technology, I guess, is a good way to talk about everything you're doing now, because after the protests in Clayoquot Sound, well, I guess if you'd like to finish your story. So early 90s.
Yeah. So let's move from the 80s into the 90s, right? So the late 80s into the 90s. And at one point in 90, about 10% of the town of Tofino had been arrested in blockades. At
10% is a good, pretty decent figure.
Yeah, it is. And then we said, okay, we have to pop this out of this region, because the regional district manager for the Ministry of Forests, he really doesn't care that much about the, several hundred people in this area, and certainly doesn't care at all about what First Nations think. So we have to make this a problem for government, that it's a problem that is bigger than our region. We have to pop it out. And so we organized a set of blockades that what came to be known as Clayoquot Summer 93 was until Fairy Creek. Those were the largest blockades in Canadian history. About 12,000 people came out to this remote area, and over 800 were arrested in nonviolent blockades. And there was jail time, there were major fines, but the most important thing is that it was worth it. The balance of activism is that sometimes it's letter writing and direct engagement, but sometimes you actually have to put your body on the line and take a step further. And in Clayoquot in 93, that resulted in there was a lot that happened in between. I've like jumped over a half a decade of activism, but what ended up happening is that the markets campaigns began. The countries and companies that were buying the products that were coming from Clayoquot Sound were aware of the area, whereas before it was some amorphous, like, it's paper. It comes from, trees that are planted, and, is this coming from Brazil or nobody really knew. And then all of a sudden you had people from Germany and England. My newspaper is, this is the dead ancient temperate rainforest. What are you kidding me? And nobody wanted that. So we popped the campaign into a different into a view of a different set of people, with a large blockade that was on the media every day on the news, and then we were able to from there springboard into affecting contracts, going to Scott Paper in England that was making toilet paper from Clackwoods rainforest, and the penny farthing buy and sell newspaper that was buying paper from the area, and a bunch of newspapers and telephone books, and all of a sudden it became public knowledge. And so that strategy, that's what, you go from strategy of writing letters to government and blockades, and then the strategy shifted to, if we go to hit the pocketbook of those who are selling products, and we threaten to mess with their markets, then all of a sudden we have a different kind of power and leverage. And that's where I really cut my teeth, I would say, in strategic activism, was saying, okay, it's not just about putting myself on the line as much as I can, but where does my leverage over the decision makers? Because I'm never going to be a decision maker in this. The environmental groups, we don't make the laws. We are not First Nations, so we don't have any legal rights over the forest. Where's my? How am I going to make any real effect on a decision maker? And that's where I started to think about, what's a strategy that changes this dynamic.
Did you have a background in any sort of economics or poli-sci stuff?
No, my background is actually, how ethereal can we get here? My background is, I have a degree in semiotics, which is kind of a part of philosophy and linguistics. It's the study of sign and symbol systems. So pretty attuned to how what's in behind how people communicate and how we make meaning of things. So that was very helpful in trying to figure out how we could communicate along lines that people already felt some sort of heartfelt feeling for forests. But generally, I've had a secondary education aside from my university education, and that was in the world of active campaigning.
It seems like that has just kind of spiraled. That has been your new path, within this activism thing, because a lot of the work you still do at Canopy seems to be targeting these markets and getting the kind of economic model that more or less runs the world in this kind of capitalist society we live in, shifting it from the supplier rather than having to rely on people speaking up to get regulations to change, or trying to change it from a different angle, which I find to be really fascinating, because it seems like not as much attention is being put on that these days in the world of activism and stuff. Yeah,
well, I think you have to do everything everywhere all at once, to use the title of a movie. There's no right activism that's more right. It's just we also need market campaigns. You also need people who are putting pressure on government decision makers and on corporations in different ways.
Right, the multi-pronged approach.
Yeah, but I became quite fascinated with some of the early successes that we had in Clackwoods, and then later in the Great Bear Rainforest campaign, by going to the customers and saying, really, do you want us to let your customers... So this is a customer of the customer, right? So McMillan Bloedel at the time, Interfor, they have customers who buy their wood products and their pulp and paper products that are made with their chips. And those are big corporate customers. Those are like the 3Ms and the Transcontinentals and the newspapers and telephone book manufacturers of the world. And those companies have customers like you and me. Right? So you and me, we're several steps away from the purchasing decisions that go into paper products or textiles that are made from wood. So I became more fascinated with how do we go further away from the forest to have more leverage over decisions.
On what happens to the forest.
On what happens to the forest, yeah. So the companies, when we were blockading, were saying, like, we're just filling demand. Yeah, we're just responding to the demand in the world, and if we don't do it, somebody else is going to log somewhere else instead, right? That was
such a classic excuse.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, let's dry up demand. How do we dry up demand? Okay. Well, there's 7 billion at that time. Now we're nearly 8 billion people in the world. How do I reach billions of people to get them to change their decisions? And as Canopy's executive director, Nicole Rycroft, has often said, those people who have teenagers know that it's very difficult to even get people who love you and know you very well to clean up their room, to change their decisions and their behavior, let alone trying to get people who don't know you, don't really care about you, and maybe don't know the topic to change their behaviors, like what clothes they're going to buy, what materials it's going to be made of. Do they ask for recycled paper at the when they go into FedEx, Kinko's or their university? So changing a lot of people's minds is a lot of work, especially when you don't have very much money and you work for a nonprofit organization. You're countering billions of dollars in advertising money that the corporations have with your small budgets from a nonprofit. So instead, when I was with Friends of Clayoquot, then with Forest Ethics, who became Stand.Earth, and now with Canopy, we've more and more refined the strategy of going to, instead of billions of people, going to a few thousand people who make decisions that affect every one of us. Because when I walk into, not even walk in, when I type in, I'm really interested in these vitamins, I'm really interested in this cream for my face, when I'm going, Patagonia, I want to order this shirt, it arrives in a box, and I have no power over what that box is made of. I have no power over what the textile in the shirt is made of. That's not my decision. That's made by the corporation that I'm purchasing from. So that's where we refine the strategy at Canopy more and more, to go to the companies, to their sustainability teams, to their procurement teams, to their executive teams, and say, how can you actually participate in protecting ancient and endangered forests by ensuring that your sourcing contains none of it.
Mm-hmm. And not even in the product, like you said, like the packaging aspect of people buying things online. Like, even if you are buying the most ethically sourced, whatever it may be, the packaging that it arrives in, the way it got there, that all has massive impact.
Yeah, you might be buying like organic, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like a cream that's, like a tube. Or you're buying your, I don't know, juice,
anything,
anything,
insert
right?
whatever
Everything.
Noun you want,
and that's when you're ordering online, which takes 7 times more packaging than if you buy it at a store. And even
if you order online, it takes
7 times more packaging than if you buy it in a store, because it gets shipped to a warehouse. The warehouse repackages it. It goes to a distributor. The distributor repackages it, and then it has to go.
And then the single package thing.
Everything that goes out.
Yeah,
right?
wow.
So
7 times.
Yes, 7 times more packaging.
That's incredible.
So but even then, think of, there are 3 billion trees that are logged every year just to make packaging. 3 billion trees. It's hard to even imagine what that is. And for man-made cellulosic textiles like viscose, rayon, lyocell, there's 300,000 trees that are, 300 million trees that are logged every year for textiles that nobody really ever realizes. So just to go back. So who makes the decisions about what the box that it's shipped in, what the box that it's packaged in? Who makes a decision about what that summer dress or the socks or the underwear that you buy? So that's who we started going to, because the individual consumer, imagine if you had to make a decision on every product that you buy every day, and then even on what it's shipped in, which you usually don't even touch because it comes in the back door of a store, and then it's on a shelf, and you don't even touch or interact with that.
Well, and I mean, anytime you go to a grocery store, like even just thinking of like the toilet paper aisle and like your standard store, like there's so many options and so much greenwashing goes into all that. Like I heard a thing where they tested a bunch of
bamboo toilet paper,
and like only 2 brands of the like few dozen they tested actually contained bamboo. A lot of it was still just
that was
paper.
in the UK. So that was just last year in 2023. So how do you know? So this is where Canopy on the textile side is doing audits of the producers of the viscose that then feed the viscose to the spinners and the weavers and the dyers.
So going straight to the manufacturers.
So go way down the supply chain and do an audit of them. And for brands like H&M and Inditex, Zara, Stella McCartney, the Kering group of luxury brands, or Walmart and even Amazon, who have policies with Canopy on their textiles. And some of these companies also have policies around making sure there's no ancient and endangered forest in their packaging. They're like, how do they know? So basically it's helping companies to get an eye on where does this stuff come from? Because usually it's somebody who's like, okay, I need a box. Who's selling this box that's capable of carrying this and sells it at the right price? They're not even looking for it. So increasingly companies that we work with are looking into what's in that box, not like inside the box, but what's in the box itself, so that we can reduce the pressure on forests. And
I feel like there's a good campaign you could do around the Brad Pitt from Seven, like what's in the box?
What's in the
box? So you mostly work in paper packaging and textiles.
That's
at
right.
Canopy.
Yeah.
And so let's take each one of these. I guess paper and packaging are kind of their own thing, and textiles is kind of its own thing as well. So let's talk about paper and packaging for a second. What's wrong with the paper packaging industry? Like, why does it need to change?
It's not going to come as a surprise to anybody that we are in a biodiversity and climate crisis.
Really? Yeah.
And a primary forest, what we often refer to in Canopy as ancient forests. So the original forests that have never been logged are 40 times better at storing carbon than a plantation or planted forest, right? Because you've got hundreds of years of embodied carbon in the soil and in the big trees, and they're still growing. So it's like each volume a tree puts on a little bit, and it's like...
Well, and then the mycorrhizal fungi and all the complexity.
And it's a system, right? So you have a really well-functioning system, and it's actually evolved in concert with the atmosphere, right? So it's not like there's forests, and then there's the atmosphere, and then there's oceans, and there's rivers. Like there are 5 big ecosystems in the world, and they all evolve together and they interact with each other. The atmosphere, the soils, forests, fresh water, and the oceans, right? They're all interacting. And so forests interact by keeping the carbon budget. They're the best technology for storing carbon in the world. And on top of that, they are biodiversity bonanzas. So the majority of terrestrial species live in forests. And so the logging of forests for timber, pulp, and paper has been it's about a quarter of the deforestation and forest degradation in the world. What are we going to do about it? Well, you can't only manage your way out of these problems by saying, "Oh, we'll do better forestry," because if the total volume of wood that you need is 3 billion trees for packaging and another, 1.5 billion trees for tissue and toilet paper, and then another $500 million for copy paper. If you're going to keep supplying that and pretending that you're going to grow that in the future, and you're going to do that with tree pulp, even if you do better management, you're just going to have to access more forest somewhere else. So if you don't log that volume from, what are the Amazon and the Atlantic forests of Brazil and the boreal forests of Canada and the Russian boreal, if you're not logging from there, where are you going to log? You're going to go into the Congo to get the volume that, if you're reducing the amount of volume you can get from better forest management. Right?
And you literally can't produce that same amount of wood volume from second growth.
Well, it's just, especially in northern climates, it takes 70, 80 years to get back to where it's considered somewhat mature. It takes hundreds or thousands of years, if ever, to get back to an old growth volume of forest, because it took thousands of years to get here. So we've got a problem, right? You can't simply do better forest management because what that means is you're going to build roads into other areas of forest to get the volume that you couldn't get from that forest you were doing poor forest management in originally. So this points to a problem. If we can't, we need to do better forest management, but we can't get the volume to supply the demand in the world. So we have two choices: reduce demand or diversify the fiber basket that we get our pulp from. And so both are necessary. We have to do demand reduction. That's tough. We've been trying for decades, and in fact, it's gone the opposite direction.
Especially when every single order you place online uses 7 times the packaging.
More. It actually gets worse, right? It's gotten worse, not better, in spite of ourselves, in spite of what we want. It's a tragedy of the commons. Everybody doing individual decisions actually, has a net result of actually things getting worse, in spite of, in our hearts wanting to do better. So I've been focused for about 15 years now on what's the alternative. And the alternative is that paper is made from cellulose fiber. Cellulose is the basic cell structure wall of every green plant, whether that's grass or algae, the stalks of the wheat straw after the grain harvest. Cellulose is everywhere that there are plants, and there are hundreds of millions of tons of agricultural fibers that are considered the residue after the food harvest every year. And hundreds of millions of tons of that residue is burned every year. So, for example,
like sugarcane, corn stalks,
like wheat straw and rice straw and sugarcane bagasse, or millet straw, tomato stems, potato stems. You harvest the food part.
Yeah, like the woody parts of the plant,
or
that
the
you
stem.
left.
With everything that's left, that's full of cellulose. That's cellulose, and a bunch of that you need to just leave to go back into the soil, but in many parts of the world, India, I'll give you an example. They burn 100 million tons of straw every year, and it causes 40% of Delhi's air pollution, which is considered one of the most air polluted cities in the world. If you live in Delhi, you will have up to 10 years less years of life because you're breathing polluted air. 40% of that pollution is going to come from burning of straw residues after the harvest of the grains.
And they're just doing that just to get rid of it?
Because when you've got that, and you've got a foot of straw.
It's not like they're like burning it for energy and like a biofuel plant.
They're burning it because the farmers need to plant the next crop, and they can't get at the soil. They can't get at the soil, so they have to clear it off and fast. So that's cellulose. So picture this. In one part of the world, let's say in Brazil, there's an Indonesia, and in the boreal forests of Canada, temperate rainforests here, we're cutting down forests that are storing carbon that we desperately held onto the earth, not in the atmosphere. We're cutting down our carbon sequestration powerhouses. And we're doing that in order that we can get access to cellulose to make pulp for paper and packaging, etc. And in another part of the world, you've got hundreds of millions of tons of cellulose and you're lighting it on fire
because it's a nuisance.
Sending the carbon from it up into, because you don't know what else to do with it, right? So this is a solution waiting for us to find it. And that's exactly what I've been doing, is finding the technology innovators around the world who have figured out how to take the cellulose from different kinds of plants and trees and convert that into high quality, economically competitive pulp for paper. And now we're at the point where those technologies have been developed and it's time to build the mills, to either retrofit wood mills that are close to the straw and convert them into a low carbon alternative, or build new mills in new areas that haven't been part of the pulp and paper economy, but are going to be where the industry transforms to.
Mm-hmm. And so you're not as much like, I always assumed it was building new industries like hemp and bamboo and like different alternatives, but you're just trying to, that too, but like a majority of it is trying to take waste products, quote unquote, of existing industries and find a good use for that.
Yeah.
And these are the next gen, what you call the next gen textiles?
These are next gen solutions because they already exist in the world as a problem. And we have the need for the cellulose, and where we're getting cellulose is currently a biodiversity and climate threat. So, we're doing a next generation technology and fiber solution, which is shifting from high carbon, high biodiversity value cellulose sources to sources that are low carbon alternatives that don't impact biodiversity. And
it's such an important time in the world to be doing that, like not only from a climate thing, but like because one of the things that I've noticed as a result of people trying to take initiative and regulations on climate change is shifting from simple things like plastic bags and plastic forks and cutlery, these kind of one-use, like single-use items that you throw away. And instead of making them out of plastic, they're making them out of paper, which means they're biodegradable, which is like great in one sense. We're moving away from plastic. But if there's no regulation in where that paper and that sourcing is coming from, it's ultimately doing more harm than good. Mm-hmm. So that's,
single-use anything is actually problematic. This is where, but that's a behavior.
And as a transition, I feel like,
So it would be great if more of us used less. Mm-hmm. Right? So that is always it. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and then regenerative alternatives. So the base from when we were kids that we learned about reduction is still a top priority, but it seems to be the hardest because that requires behavior change, and behavior change happens in generally when you look at the history of how revolutions have happened, whether those are technological revolutions or social evolutions, they happen. Nothing happens for a long time, and then they happen really quickly. So in the interim, we need to protect forests, or we will not have what we need to protect 10 years from now when the behavior changes really kick in.
Yeah, and it seems like in those instances, it's more of like just small systems change. You look at like the taco truck or takeout place that's always just had takeout things. Like, so how do you replace that system where people are just so accustomed to getting their food and taking it to go?
And this is what we call the drop-in solutions, where if I receive a French fries in a paper takeout container, I don't know what that's made of. Usually I just take it and I eat the French fries, dispose of it. So if you make the paper from bagasse or wheat straw that would have been burned in the field instead of from a tree, then you change the world without me as an individual buying that French fry, having to make a decision. But which taco truck am I going to? What kind of paper do they use, right?
Yeah.
These are drop-in solutions that can be widely distributed and nobody notices the difference.
It just fixes the problem without people having to actually make the choice.
The vast majority of people having to make choices. But you do have to make some choices further back in the supply chain. And this is where Canopy works. We work further back in the supply chain so that you have fewer people needing to make a decision about, I'm going to invest my money here, I'm going to retrofit my mill, or I'm going to build a new mill. I'm an investor. I'm going to invest my hundreds of millions that I usually invest into oil and gas, and I'm going to instead invest in a low carbon capital industry. Right. So those are the
Do you
kinds
get a
of
lot
shifts.
of those investors?
Yeah, that's a
amazing.
lot of the work. My work is actually mobilizing investment into this space, because how does it change? We need $78 billion over the next decade to transform the pulp and paper supply chain. 78 billion.
Is that pulp and paper supply chain globally?
Globally.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big number, but at least you have that mapped out.
You know,
Like,
you want to know how that sounds like insane.
It is, but
right?
I mean, but it's nice to know the size of the problem you're up against versus this kind of amorphous thing where like, oh God, like, I don't know, you know.
But let's break this down a little bit. So the company that makes Botox, for making sure that you don't have wrinkles
Sure.
if you
Okay.
Feel really strongly about
Like the
it.
pharmaceutical.
The pharmaceutical.
Okay.
Yeah. So in I think it was 2017, that company was sold for $60 billion.
60 billion. Just one company.
Just one company.
And you
One
need
time.
78
And
billion?
we need 78 billion over a decade in order to shift the entire pulp and paper supply chain that is currently using ancient and endangered forests out of it. Right? So it really isn't a lot of money. It's a lot of money to you and me, but it isn't a lot of money in the investment sector.
Right. And in the grand scheme of like economics on Earth, it seems like that's like worth the like extra 10 cents or whatever that people would pay for a decade.
Should we spend our $60 billion to prevent wrinkles, or should we spend just a little bit more to prevent runaway climate change and reverse the biodiversity crisis?
It's almost too close to the intro of Idiocracy. I'm not sure if you've seen that movie, but yeah. Where does recycling come into all this?
Yeah, so there isn't like one silver bullet. So next gen solutions are a major plank in the strategy to shift the pulp and paper and the textile industry out of ancient and endangered forests. But there's actually a hierarchy of what we need to do. First, reduce. We're aiming at a 5% reduction over the next 8 years. So there's still 400 million tons of pulp that's going to be produced, even if you do a reduction strategy. And so you reduce, and then we need about another 60 million tons of recycled paper, which is something that the industry is already very comfortable with. And as there's paper produced, they produce more. And as cities try and avoid landfilling, they tend to increase the recycled capability. So we're pushing on companies to maximize the amount of recycled fiber that they have, and then whatever they would use virgin wood fiber for, use next gen solutions instead.
Mm-hmm. So no forest inputs at all then?
Well, no, forests are going to continue to be because they're part of it, because you need virgin wood fiber mixed in order to have recycled fiber. In order to make recycled paper, they can only get recycled about 6 times.
Right, before it's
just too short a fiber, and it just like, then you get your egg carton type, and then it goes to the dump. Right, so
compost or something.
Yeah, compost.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, right now, yeah. But so you do need a longer virgin wood fiber or a longer cellulose fiber as an input constantly to keep the quality of recycled fiber high enough that you can make a cardboard box or something, some sort of packaging, or even copy paper. So where's that fiber going to come from? Well, trees are going to continue to be part of the mix. It's not that we're saying no trees at all. Is it? We need to use about 60 million tons less trees of the 400 million tons of paper that are produced in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is where it's not the devil's advocate in me, but just because I've heard this argument from so many other people, as soon as we talk about using less fiber, there's this idea in the world, I feel like the logging forestry industry, that, like you mentioned at the beginning, if they don't do it here in BC, then they're just going to do it in China, and they're going to steal jobs. They're going to do it elsewhere around the world. And, when you look at Drax cutting down old growth forests in northern BC and turning that into wood pellets, or what's still happening with Paper Excellence, just liquidating clear cut or liquidating old growth forests and turning it into paper, the the argument there is that like they're employing people, even if it's only 12 people in like a mill in northern BC, they're employing those 12 people rather than those jobs going overseas. So it's like, how do you combat that whole argument?
Well, we see that the next generation of new pulp production is more likely going to come from regions that are high agricultural producers, and it's already been shifting away from places like Canada in the 1990s and through the 2000s, because places like Brazil and Indonesia started, growing plantation forest. Right? Not great, but that's where the shift happened. And there's going to be another shift that's about to happen, because as countries like India, also Indonesia, Brazil, which have a lot of agricultural fiber and constant, like multiple crops per year, realize that they can monetize the residues, they're going to become a bigger competitor. So the technology is evolving whether Canada wants it or not, right? And these countries are going to monetize and adopt these technologies for pulping agrofiber whether Canada wants it or not, whether Russia wants it or not, whether Sweden wants it or not. So things are shifting. And so how you develop this new industry and who gets employed is just part of the changes in the world. Some of it's going to happen for market reasons, and some of it's going to happen for environmental reasons, overlapping. So you may be losing some jobs in mills in Canada. We are already experiencing that. We've lost more than half of the forest industry labor in British Columbia since I started working on these issues, right? Not because of environmental laws or regulations, but because we lost market share, right? So the market share is going to shift again. And there are going to be people who are employed in India and Indonesia and Brazil. And I think that there are going to be a lot of people who get employment out of this in Canada's prairie lands. So the mills are going to shift away from the forest and closer to the new fiber feedstocks.
Right, like flax and hemp seed and stuff.
Flax and hemp. Canada's one of the biggest growers of flax in the world, one of the biggest growers of wheat straw in the world. Canada actually has a lot to gain in this area by coming up instead of resisting, but coming forward with there's a mill called Red Leaf that's ready to receive some finance right now, and it would build in Saskatchewan right now. There's a mill in Alberta, a company called Plante, that would build right now if there was investment. So if the government were to actually stop resisting and actually help these companies to move forward, help it make it more attractive for investors into Canada, then we would profit from that, and labor would profit from that, and we would be ahead of the curve in the shift on how labor is going to shift in the pulp and paper industry. It already started shifting. It started shifting decades ago, and we're just looking to the next decade and saying, where we're going to be. It's not going to be wood that's going to be the primary new pulp source. Where does Canada sit in this? Where does Sweden sit in this? I think the shifts are happening, and we're going to be ahead of the curve if we think forward to what we need for climate, where technology is moving, and where the opportunities are going to land.
Is there a lot of resistance from the existing kind of like paper industry?
Yeah.
Like, are they putting out like smear campaigns and stuff? I remember when like oat milk and almond milk started blowing up like 10, 15 years ago, the milk industry was putting out a bunch of stuff. Like, yeah.
Actually, that's one of the reasons it's been a pleasure to be working in India more, is that India is already the second biggest producer of non-wood pulp in the world. China's the biggest. India is the second biggest. So the idea of using agricultural fiber for making paper is just like, oh yeah, we already make 1 million tons of that. Like, okay, oh, there's better technology. Oh, cool. Let's take a look at it. We could be part of the export market into Europe to meet their new deforestation regulation. Awesome. How are we going to take advantage of it? So that's how the pulp industry and paper industry in India has received us. When I've been talking about this in North America, oh my God, it's completely the opposite, where they feel so threatened. Instead of saying, how can we look into this? The industry started putting out agricultural fiber makes poor quality paper. It's like, yeah, okay. This was like 10 years ago. They started in on this. You spend 150 years putting all of your research and development into pulping wood. Tell me 150 years ago what the wood pulp quality was like. Huh?
It's the same with it's like renewable energy is the same. It's like, oh, electricity isn't as good as oil and gas. It's like, no, like we've been putting so much energy into this one thing. So. And
actually, that's really important. So if you look at oil and gas and how they responded to solar and wind, and how the narrative, the supporting narrative, and was, it's super expensive. It's like only the rich can afford solar or wind energy. And then in a decade, from 2009 to 2019, right, the cost of producing a kilowatt of energy went down by 80% in solar, and went down by 70% in wind energy.
It's the steepest price drop of any energy source.
And now it's cheaper, right? So we can see exactly the same. It's technology innovation, refinement, and then economy of scale. So we know that the technology is out there. It's being refined now, and that the scale of mills built that are about to be built means that you're going to get these economy of scale benefits from, instead of having small mills here and there, an entire sector that has the advantages of selling a bunch of pulp, not as a niche product, but as a commodity. And then it's going to be price competitive. And we've heard from some of the innovators, potentially cheaper than wood pulp.
Wow.
Yeah.
But from an end use perspective, what are the differences in quality like? I guess it depends on what it's made of.
Yeah, so like hemp and flax are called bast fibers. So and jute is, they're these plants that
super durable.
Yeah, very long cellulose fiber chains. So it's like more like if you were to need that kind of length and strength, you would cut softwoods in the boreal forests of Canada or in British Columbia, maybe pine in the southeast U.S. But most paper is made with hardwoods, which are shorter wood fibers, and wheat straw, and a lot of the most grains are more competitive in the quality with
hardwoods.
With hardwoods, yeah. So that's.
But like when you get it at the end, like it feels the same. It looks like paper. You can make a paper airplane and fold it.
You can make copy paper. You can put it in the photocopier. You can print on it. You can make posters. You can make cardboard boxes, and you can make the packaging that your favorite vitamins come in. It's paper. It's just paper. All right. So this is the thing. When I pick up a piece of paper, I have no idea what it's made of. In order for me to have a sense of it, I would have to have gone through 4 years of pulp and paper engineering school, look up to the light, tear it a little bit, look at the fibers. The majority of us will never notice the difference.
Like we would never have a need to.
No.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about textiles.
Okay.
Because I guess just like as a precursor, a similar thing. There's been a lot of demand moving away from, especially, so there's like, what is it, rayon?
So they're called so there's a type of textile, a class of textiles called man-made cellulosic fibers. Those are in rayon, which in Europe is called viscose. So rayon and viscose is 80% of that is man-made cellulosics, become those textiles. And then lyocell.
Lyocell, that was the one I was trying to think of, yeah.
Which there's a brand name that one company has called Tencel, which you often will see on clothing. It is also in acetate, glasses, your computer screen. Those are made from acetate, and acetate is made from a man-made cellulosic fiber. But cigarette filters, Right.
Cool. Those are going out too. But yeah.
But those are the fraction. The majority of it's, for rayon and viscose. Okay. And so you take a tree, about 30% of a tree is cellulose fiber. You throw it into a big vat. You throw a ton of chemicals at it. You heat it up and boil it, and you extract the cellulose from everything else that's in a tree. So about 30% of the tree is cellulose. That gets then sent into, the dissolving pulp gets sent into an extruder, and you get these very fine fibers that get woven into a textile. I never thought I'd get involved in the fashion industry because, if you look at me,
you're classy.
I'm
function.
Yeah, I'm not the person that you would usually say, "Oh, go talk to Valerie about fashion." But for some, quirky turn of my life, I have become a person who's been involved in the environmental side of the fashion industry, and that's because there are a lot of brands who there are at this point nearly 600 brands, household brands, like H&M and Zara and Walmart and Amazon's private label brands and Stella McCartney, who have said, we're not going to use ancient and endangered forest fiber. And so at first that was just like, let's get some FSC certified wood fiber. But then eventually there's only that much FSC, and the demands is actually increasing for these man-made cellulosic textiles. And so we have to look for alternatives, and that's circular textiles. So cotton, you're wearing a cotton shirt, right?
This is hemp.
That's hemp. What about your shorts?
I believe that's hemp and cotton.
Okay. So
Patagonia.
Both of those are cellulosics. Cotton textile is a 100% cellulose, right? So when we throw away, which is about 98% of all textiles in the world, eventually end up in a landfill or on the beaches of Ghana, right? We're about 20% of those textiles are made from cotton, close, a little over 20%, 25%. And so we're throwing away cellulose in those cases. So there are a number of technology innovators that have figured out how to take that cotton or the hemp fiber or the viscose, that old viscose that's been sent off to the landfill, and instead divert it and recapture that cellulose and turn it back into a rayon or a lyocell.
And so the rayon and lyocells, to my understanding, kind of do better replacing polyester, right? It's a more plasticky sheen type thing versus something natural feeling like a cotton or hemp.
Yeah, so it depends how you make it, but they're called a semi-synthetic. So I mean, there's so much usually so much chemistry used to extract the cellulose and create the dissolving pulp and the viscose, that it's maybe wood that goes in at the front end, but by the time it comes out as a textile, it's semi-synthetic. It has it's called a hand feel or a drape that's a little bit more, they call it the poor man's silk. It has a bit more of a silky sheen and a silky feel to it than cotton and hemp would. But you can make it a little bit more cottony in the feel if you want to, depending on how you spin it. And it's about 6% of all textiles in the world are these man-made cellulosic fibers.
What's that compared to traditional polyester stuff?
Oh, polyester is 60%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, because it's so cheap.
A fraction.
Yeah, but there's a lot of brands are trying to shift away from virgin polyester. So there's a class of technologies right now that are developing to take old polyester clothing and recycle it and have rPET for recycle, so that you never have to, because you can recycle it over and over and over.
Oh, can you?
And just don't use it. But often what happens is you have cotton poly mix. And so if you have the cotton and the polyester that are in a blended fabric, it renders, if it's less than 70% cotton, and then and the polyester is kind of locked in, like you use what the weave is this way, and let's say that's polyester and the weft is this way and that's cotton. You can't mechanically recycle it very well into a high quality product. But some of these new technologies that are coming on market, like Circ and Avenue, Blocktex, they can take these fibers and separate them out. And then you can take
chemically or
yeah. So it's called chemical recycling, but
because if it's not a mechanical recycling, it's got to be
So but you can recapture the chemistry and reuse that. So it's a closed loop process. It's not like chemistry and then you dump it into the river. So it's like you're using the same chemistry over and over, and it's and the types of chemicals are not highly toxic. Like making viscose in the first place, highly toxic. Making a recycled viscose from old cotton, or the process to separate polyester from cotton can be water under pressure, for example. Really? Yes. And so there's different technologies for doing it, but then you can get the polyester back into recycled poly and the cotton can go into the viscose. And as cotton has reached peak cotton growing, that there's no more land to grow cotton on. So we're at peak cotton growing. But the textile sector is growing and the demand for cotton-like materials is growing. So the pressure on forests to provide a cotton-like material is growing. So if you capture the old cotton and put it back into a viscose textile that has more of a cotton feel, that's a way to make sure that the future is not shifting away from cotton itself is not impacting forests.
So it's not as much using new resources; it's going back to recycling.
Yeah, so it's called circular fashion.
And so theoretically, that would be 100% circular if you were to get.
You could theoretically you can make fashion 100% circular.
I have two major questions about that. About rayon and lyocell in particular. First, chemical use doesn't sound like it's very good. Is that really, I guess it depends on the regulations and how you manage it, but it sounds like a lot goes into that process. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so aside from only getting 30% of a tree into the cellulose and the rest has to be disposed of because it's really, by that point you've thrown tons of sodium hydroxide or carbon disulfide chemicals that are really toxic.
Yeah, things that don't sound good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So 80% of man-made cellulosics are rayon, and that's the one that uses the most toxic chemistry. So yeah, it's not pretty. And in China, where the majority of the manufacturing happens, they've really tightened the regulations over the last decade, but it used to just get dumped full on into the rivers. And so a new process was invented called lyocell. A lyocell is a closed loop process, so they use a lot of toxic chemistry, but they recapture the chemicals and reuse them. So it's a
kind of reuse it indefinitely.
Yeah, so it's a circular process. Right. You don't end up like with the water pollution. And then the new generation of technologies use a completely different type of chemistry. First of all, up to 50% less chemicals overall, and everything is when you talk about chemicals, we say chemicals as if they're all the same, but some chemicals like you use in your food, right? There's the toxicity is like a range. And so you use a low toxicity chemistry in a closed loop process, and all of a sudden you have a much better outcome.
My second question is, I know a lot of the demand for getting away from poly-based stuff, especially for athletic wear, and then using rayon and lyocell to replace that is good because it comes from better sources. But one of the big things with poly stuff is you end up with all these microplastics, like these fine thread filaments that break down and enter the water cycle, enter our bloodstream, and become part of our bodies. Does lyocell have that same kind of microplastic issue, or does it break down? Like,
it's not a microplastic because it's not made of plastic.
It's a semi-synthetic, but does it biodegrade?
Yeah. Theoretically, it could biodegrade. But it's semi-synthetic, so it's not going to degrade the way that cotton would or hemp would. It's contributing to microfiber pollution, not microplastic pollution. Polyester, cheap, oil-based, 60% of all textiles. Man-made cellulosics, currently 6% of all the textiles. So the total amount of microfiber pollution coming from man-made cellulosics is not as big a problem, but it's definitely contributing.
So when you work with these brand partners and you work with all these different people, are there different levels that people sign on to, that brands sign on to?
All of the brands sign on to the same policy. So we have 900 plus brands right now, from Ben and Jerry's and, some of these companies, Cheekbone Cosmetics, there's a number of companies that have signed on, because of their packaging, and others that are textile and packaging. So they all have the same base key criteria in their policy, that they will stop using ancient or endangered forest fiber, and they will engage in efforts to reduce their total consumption of raw materials, and they will engage in conservation efforts around the world. So they all have the same. They're all rowing in the same direction, which is one of the advantages of our work. Is if even a big company, I'm going to just take H&M because everybody knows them. All right. So even if H&M said, hey, suppliers, I want to buy only circular man-made cellulosics textiles, they don't buy enough to make it worth the while. Even though they're the biggest.
Even H&M doesn't?
They do not buy enough to buy one whole mill's production.
Really?
Yeah. That's how big the fashion industry is.
Wow.
And 80% of purchases of textiles are from small and medium-sized businesses. So these great, big, monstrous companies like Target and Walmart, even though they are the biggest individual buyers, they're like between them 15% of the market. And most of it happens with small and medium-sized enterprises. So we need to get more than one company. Obviously, we need to get hundreds of companies who say to their supply chain the exact same thing, because you have a lot of companies buying from a narrower group of suppliers who are getting their supply from a narrower source as you go down that supply chain. And so you need everybody to be saying exactly the same thing, so that the supplier says, okay, I now have hundreds of companies asking me for the same thing. That's worth investing in shifting over my mill or shifting my sourcing.
That's so interesting, because from a public-facing messaging, a lot of the time you hear a lot of flack for companies like H&M and Zara. Like, I'm in no way endorsing them. I think like overconsumption is, like, they are driving
the
a lot
Sheins of the world.
Horrible. Yeah. And there's a lot of like public-facing pressure, riots and movements to get them to change their ways. But when you're saying that even all these different brands, as big as they are, still only go to a handful of manufacturers, it seems like they're the kind of ones behind the scenes controlling what or not necessarily what gets made, but how it gets made.
Yeah. So when at this point, about I'm a little bit rusty on the facts, but it's around 5 companies, 5 producers that produce 80% of the world's man-made cellulosics.
Wow.
Right.
And those are stationed overseas. I'm assuming
they're
multiple
in China,
countries.
Indonesia, India, and Austria.
So do you work with them quite directly then?
We work with them directly. Yeah. And they are partners. They have signed up. So the majority of the producers of man-made cellulosic fibers have policies with Canopy. Not all of them are 100% implemented. And some of them are way far away from being 100% implemented, but that's what our audit does, is it audits these companies, and we produce something called the Hot Button Report every year, which ranks the producers of man-made cellulosic fibers for have they gotten rid of all of the ancient and endangered forest fiber that was in their supply chain? Yes, green shirt. No, red shirt, and everywhere in between. So we rank them for, have they eliminated ancient and endangered forest fiber sources? Have they been trialing or testing alternative fibers, these next-gen solutions? Have they started producing any or buying pulp from alternative suppliers coming into the circular fashion market? And then if they're doing these things, then they can get points, and then they become from light green shirt to darker green shirt, dark green shirt.
Is there any, there's no penalties or anything if they fail to keep their word?
No, this is all voluntary. Yeah, but the reason that it's working and that we've shifted 50%, actually 54% of the producers of man-made cellulosics have shifted their sourcing, because companies like H&M and Zara and Shein are saying, H&M and Zara, it was by 2020 because they were early sign-ons with us. Shein, it's by 2025. And they've said, we're going to be free of ancient and endangered forests in our man-made cellulosic textiles. And we're going to shift our purchases to whoever can supply that. And so the producers are like, well, pick me. I'll figure out how to be your supplier.
Right, because they want the business too.
They want the business.
Yeah.
So these are voluntary commitments. That we don't have a way. We're not lawmakers. We don't have a way of finding them if they don't do it. But it's basically the way that the market works, where because we're doing audits, if a producer is, has a red shirt, that means that they lose market share. They just can't sell into, at this point, especially the European market.
Yeah, I think, are there buyers then who look at those brands and who look to the Canopy report? And
our Hot Button Report is used as a sourcing guide for thousands of brands. Even brands that are not signed up with us use that as a buying guide. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about some of the recent wins you guys have had.
Well, on the financial side, I've worked in the nonprofit sector pretty well all my life, and usually that's a very hand-to-mouth feeling where you never have enough money, never have enough staff, wonder where the next paycheck is going to come from. It's quite stressful, and the more successful you get, the more expectation there is, but no more money, generally.
Preaching to the choir.
Right?
Yep.
That was the case for Canopy. We were like kind of a boutique nonprofit that nobody had ever heard of, who were really punching above our weight. Because we weren't like in the public eye, but we were really making traction with brands who were using our expertise to make their purchasing decisions, and that was affecting the supply chain. And that got the attention of some people associated with the Audacious Project, which is a project of TED. And they asked us to apply for the Audacious Project, and we were selected in 2023 as one of 10 organizations that year to receive the Audacious Project financing, which is $60 million for the next 6 years, to catalyze next generation solutions around the world. So our goal is to get 60 million tons of next gen pulp into the market to displace the wood from ancient and endangered forests that's currently going into the pulp and paper and viscose supply chain.
That's huge. I mean, it's not the 68 billion that's needed.
No, but we're catalytic.
But it's, you're starting it.
Yeah, so this is that kind of money allows us to hire experts in India, in North America, in Brazil,
and to build
in
those
Europe,
first mills,
and to go to the financiers and the equity, the Black Rocks of the world, to go to governments who provide capital grants for infrastructure and say, here's the strategy. How are you going to be engaged? So we get to catalyze both the technology innovation. We know them, introduce them to the investors, introduce them to the markets, and create the space for it all to build and snowball.
Yeah, that's amazing. Would you say you're optimistic of the future?
I'm always an optimist. An optimist is, I would say, let's put it this way. An optimist is somebody who's realistic about the chances of success, but has a strategy for threading the needle. Right. So I differentiate between hope and optimism. Hope is to me, I'm on a sinking boat because there's a hole in the boat, and I hope that something changes, right? That something, I don't know what, intervenes. Whereas an optimist is, there's a hole in the boat, we're sinking, there's an island that far away. If I take this flotation device and pull 10 people together and we all kick together, there's a 20% chance we'll make it to the island.
Mm-hmm. So more solutions focus.
That's to me is optimism. So I have a really keen sense of how narrow the chances are given climate change and biodiversity crisis. I'm not. I don't have rose-colored glasses on, but I also have seen this very sector change in a decade. So. In the 1990s, the pulp and paper sector, they shifted dramatically, and none of us really think about this very much, that there's been a full-on transformation in a decade in the same industry. So we went from being a majority virgin fiber paper world to being a 54% recycled paper world. And that change happened mainly in a decade. So in 10 years, 60 million tons of recycled paper capacity was built around the world. Nobody made a big fuss about it, right? There was a movement around recyclability, and the industry just got to it, invested, technology improved, etc. So we know that it's possible for the pulp and paper sector to shift from one fiber to another fiber, improve the technology, and build massive amounts of capacity. And we think that's going to happen. It needs a strategy. It needs some governments involved. It needs equity financiers involved to do the first proof of concept for the first maybe dozen mills. And once you've proved it, then everybody else piles in.
When it comes to the forests, I guess, and ecosystems, I mean, you told me that you're an optimist. How do you remain optimistic, I think? Given your experience and your background, given everything that you saw at the original Clayoquot protests, and then, the fact that basically those same things happened 20 years down the road, 30 years later, with Fairy Creek, and we're still fighting this battle to protect forests. 30% of the old growth forest in British Columbia has been lost since those initial Clayoquot action protests. So how do you do it? How do you?
Yeah, I always want revolutionary change, and I always get incremental change. And again, this goes back to my theory of change, which is it happens extremely slowly and then all at once. It seems like nothing's going to change, and then from one day to the next. And I don't know what the catalyst to that change will be. It's usually unpredictable, and we have to be ready for when it happens. That's the way that it's happened in the French Revolution, and the way it happened in technology. Nobody was predicting that we'd be walking around with a computer in our pockets that communicates with satellites, 20 years ago, that every single one of us would have a cell phone, right? These changes happen almost overnight. In a decade, the whole thing changes. We're bumping against the relevance of change with system collapse at this point, right? So how quickly can it change, and will it be enough? My optimism stems from that all of the big change in the world has happened very quickly when it started. And I don't know when that start point is. We may be in it right now, and I just don't have the eye to it. I just want to be prepared to work with it when it happens. So that's part of my optimism. The other is that at really micro scales, I can only really see and comprehend what's in my real view. And I've had some really lucky experiences. When I was involved in the Clayoquot campaign, that was a huge area of temperate rainforest that's been protected. It was the biggest, that any one of the organizations involved had ever dealt with in BC. And then, like 2 years later, we launched the Great Bear Rainforest campaign. And then I was really lucky to be a negotiator in the Great Bear Rainforest, where 6.5 million hectares, 85% of it off limits to logging. Huge areas of that were protected. First Nations stepping into a decision-making role in their territories where they had been shut out of that. Like, there was such, really positive and big changes that happened, and it went from at this scale, and then the next one that I was involved in was, more than 10 times the scale of change. Then we did market campaigns, which were this big, and then organizations around the world picked up market campaigns. So although the scale of problems is really big, we also have way more people working much smarter, not just me and my group. It's a community of millions, like literally millions of people who are working on this. And it takes a moment for something just to click and snowball. And then change happens very quickly.
Beautiful. Do you have any other final thoughts or words?
Final thoughts or words. Might be like two things that would be important. So usually, and in my work, at the beginning of my, let's call it a career, although I didn't think of it as a career when I started out. I was a literacy teacher who ended up as an activist, forest activist. I was involved in forest protection. Like, I was right in the forest, like we are right now. Right? I was at the tree stopping the bulldozers. And the further I've gone in my career, the further away from the forest I have been in my work, and the more leverage I've built. Right? So I go to markets that are in places where they've lost all their forest. I go to producers in China where they lost 100% of their old growth primary forest, decades and decades ago. Right? So that's just to think about what we can do for forests. We have to not think about, I don't live in a forest, what can I do? It's actually more about how do we influence the dynamics that are impacting forests around the world. And everybody in every town, in every village, in every city that is buying products that come in packages, that is going to a store, every single one of us comes into contact with forests. So it's important to constantly consider your agency in forest conservation. And my final thought on this is about how fundamental forests are in our lives, and even people who maybe have never even taken a walk in a forest. From their first breath, they became interactive with forests because they're fundamental to the oxygen production of our world. So we breathe in oxygen that has been produced by trees, whether in the Amazon or the Boreal, the Congo. And that first breath, when we consider ourselves alive in the world, is the first time that we interact with a forest. What's the last thing you do when you die? You take your last breath. So we literally have a relationship with forests. It starts from birth until our last day. And so I think my parting words would be, you are forests. They define your beginning and your end.
That's beautiful. I love that way of looking at it.
Me too. That's why I work on forests. I think of them with every breath.
On that note, with all the work that you do and the people involved, for every episode of this podcast, I do a donation to a nonprofit of the guest choice, thanks to support from people who support this project on Patreon. Is there someone that comes to mind who you would like today's donation to go to, and why?
Well, so my heart place is Clayoquot Sound. It's where I really connected with forests and changed the direction of my life. And it's a place that's very dear to my heart. So I would love people to do a donation to the Friends of Clayoquot Sound.
Easy. And where can people go to learn more about Canopy and see this list of amazing partners and all the work you do? So
www.canopyplanet.org.
Cool. And Canopy, is it Canopy Planet on Instagram as well and all that?
Probably.
I'll throw the links in the show notes here.
I'm not on Instagram.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Life's better off Instagram.
I have limited attention span.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a blast talking to you.
Yeah, it's been so great to be here in the forest with you.
It's been a great experience.
Yeah.
Great little forest we got here.
Isn't it beautiful?
Let's keep them around a little bit longer.
Yeah,
hey?
let's do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Val. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on today's episode. I hope you found that conversation to be as enlightening and inspiring as I did. I reached out to Val to see if she had any general calls to action or things she would like to kind of promote, and she said to basically support forest protection organizations wherever you are in the world, and to call and write to your elected representatives to enforce the expectations that they will continue to protect old-growth forests, which is something that is under threat as we speak, both in the United States and Canada and kind of all over the world. So, really important issue to be involved and engaged on. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by Canopy Planet, who, as you just learned, do all sorts of amazing work around the world to kind of take pressure off forests and help create a better future for all of us. And so you can learn more about them and the work they do at canopyplanet.org or at Canopy Planet on your favorite social media platform. And I will share links to ways to get involved with them in the show notes here, as well as links to some more of Val's work and ways you can get involved. Now, for every episode of the Nerd About Nature Podchat series, I make a donation using funds from my Patreon and Substack supporters to a nonprofit of my guest choice. And today, Valerie chose to give her donation to Friends of Clayoquot Sound, which has a really easy website to remember. It's focs.ca. And I will throw links to that in the show notes as well. Now, this conversation I had with Valerie was really impactful. It stuck with me at the moment. Obviously, she said some really amazing things. But literally maybe half an hour prior to sitting down with Valerie, I was actually in the woods with my camera stuff, kind of trying to find a good place for us to sit down. And I got a call on my phone. I don't know where else you get a call. I got a call from Sonia Furstenau, the then leader of the Green Party of British Columbia, asking to chat. And it sounded, I was like, what do you want to chat about? And then so I called her back that afternoon after recording this with Val, and that's kind of when she pitched me on running in my riding on Vancouver Island, which I ended up doing. But that was kind of my first kind of foray into politics, if you will. And obviously Sonia is incredibly charismatic and persuasive in her pursuit to get me to run as a candidate for the Green Party. But a lot of what Valerie had said really stuck with me and resonated with me, and I actually reached out to her after this proposal from Sonia to kind of get her opinions on it. Specifically, what she was talking about, like how as she's kind of gone through life and learned these various different things, that the further that she gets away from the forest, like physically, she actually has more leverage to protect the forest. And I just found that to be such an inspiring, and just like, and this deeply concerned and caring perspective to take, because, you know, I love romping around in the woods. I love spending time in these forests and doing all these fun nature videos and educating people about that. Like, I love it, but it's also kind of selfish because I recognize that me being in these forests may also not be the most effective way to protect them. And so when I was considering this option to run for politics, I really saw that as like a way for me to be like, okay, as much as I would love to continue spending my time in the outdoors and bushwhacking and amongst these amazing rare ecosystems, maybe it is a little bit more effective for me to spend my time, you know, spend a couple years in Victoria downtown in the Parliament and like put my time in there to help protect these forests in just a different way. Which obviously didn't come to fruition. I didn't win. I'm not a politician, which is fine by me. That was a learning experience. Whole different subject there. But yeah, I think that was just like a really important takeaway for me. And I think it's something that we can all kind of learn from, you know, no matter what we do in life. Like it's obviously we want to be close and connected to the things we love, but sometimes the things that threaten those things we love come from faraway places. And sometimes you need to venture to those places and venture into those uncomfortable realms in order to protect what you love back home. So I thought that was a really inspiring and awesome part of everything that Valerie had to say. So I thought I'd just share that with you all there. Now, if you're enjoying this Nerdy About Nature Podchat series, all the long form videos I do on YouTube, the short form videos on social media, all the writing I do on Substack, all of it is part of an independent passion project called Nerdy About Nature, which is supported by folks like yourself. So if you're enjoying this Podchat series and you want to help see it continue into the future, you can help support it by becoming a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/nerdyaboutnature or on Substack at nerdyaboutnature.substack.com. Either way, just stoked to have you here learning and engaging about this world we all share and ways to make it better. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you next time. This episode of the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series was produced by me, Ross Reed, and made possible with support from individuals like yourself. For ways to support this project and to learn more, check out nerdyaboutnature.com or at nerdyaboutnature on your favorite social platform.